1 year later, you will recall that in July, after the loss of lives and the loss of the Finance Bill 2024, the President announced that there would be austerity measures to cut expenditure. And indeed, a supplementary budget was passed in the House, supplementary budget one that lowered the expenditure by 145 billion shillings, including 139 coming from the national government, or the national executive, if you like. Now, part of that was cutting expenditure for different offices, from the Office of the President, from State House, Office of the Deputy President, and we'll be looking at some of those figures later that would show you that ever since the reduction to 4.3 billion shillings for the budget of State House, for instance, in subsequent supplementary bills, it has been reinstated and increased to 12 billion shillings, which is contained in the supplementary budget that was just tabled last week, or presented last week. Now, Vincent, talk to us about the governance progress that you've made in that 1 year. Did we learn any lesson in June 2024?
I think there were so many lessons to be learned. Whether we have learned them and taken action on them is a different thing. First, you will realize that when we were talking about the gains, even the gains that have been put in the media today, particularly in The Nation, you will realize that those legal gains are only coming from cases that are not criminal cases. They're only coming from cases that are civil, constitutional cases. Yeah, when we are talking about the court reinforcing the right to picket and all those things. However, in terms of criminal accountability, there is still a very huge gap when it comes to criminal accountability, yet it forms the core of accountability when we are talking about the injuries and the deaths and the maims and assaults that arose out of the protest. So there is still yet a lot to be done, and I think that the gains have been very minimal. If 1 year down the line we still see abductions and we still see killings, such as happened in the case of Ojwang, right, then certainly we are not taking action on any gain. But I just want to react also to two things that my colleagues talked about. And first, Commissioner mentioned about how they have to lobby for them to get adequate funds. And indeed, the Kenya National Human Rights Commission and other commissions are not being funded adequately. Ideally, they are actually not even supposed to be put in a position to lobby, because under the Constitution, Article 249, the state is supposed, by dint of constitutional duty, to provide adequate funds to constitutional commissions and other arms of government. So that is a glaring gap. But then also, the constitutional commissions have a duty to observe democratic values and principles in all spheres of government. From that statement in the Constitution, it means that they also have jurisdiction over the KDF. Yeah? When we have human rights violations occurring, whether it's KDF or police or in any sphere of government, then they certainly have that constitutional duty. But this gap of accountability, or lack of it thereof, it's even necessitated more. And I'm not a politician and I wouldn't want to go into politics, but it is even necessitated more when you have a political class that by dint of a general election, they are required to keep government on check, but then they abandon that duty and want to cross over into government. Then it creates more of a gap. And so the question is, who is then left among the political class, who is then left to check government? Yeah. So for me, there are institutions, there's the civil society organizations, the public in general, and also within the legislature, there are those who are mandated to check on government. And we seem to be failing when it comes to accountability across the board.
Right. Odor, for you, especially when you're focusing on the many promises that came, whether it's on cutting expenditure, reforming our institutions, listening more to the people and doing what the aspirations are. And the sort of parliament that we now have, what do you make of it a year later?
Sam, I'm going to answer that, but also allow me to comment on the situation at Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Okay. I think it's time we start to refer to the commission as state defunded, not state funded. Because that is state defunded. State defunded.
State defunded, not
and not state funded, because that is what this regime is doing, and it should not be the case. They should get enough resources so that they can keep this regime in check. What lessons has this regime learned from before? I don't think they have learned any lessons. The goons that we saw on the streets last week, that was a form of informal repression. So informal repressions means the state covertly deploys goons, vigilante groups to curtail civil rights, so they come and maim, so that you do not point a finger back to state agents and say you did this. It is not a new phenomenon in Kenya. It happened in the 90s during the time of the late President Daniel Arap Moi. You remember the so-called Jeshi la Mzee. They would cause havoc to political opponents of the regime, and this resulted in a lot of casualties. In the next regime of Mwai Kibaki, remember after the 2007 election, during the 2007 election, post-election violence, working reports showed that the violence were escalated by involvement of vigilante groups like Mungiki. That was form of an informal repression. When you come again to the time of Uhuru Kenyatta, anytime the opposition at the time called NASA would go on the street for different reasons, whether IBC or wherever, then the so-called Nairobi business community will emerge. The essence is not to protect the business interest of people within the CBD, but rather to curtail the right to protest. And it is the same thing that we witnessed last week, people coming on the street claiming that tumekuja kulinda jiji and so forth. But that, in essence, is just a form of informal repression. When Ruto came to power in 2022, he said he will disband the killer unit. It was called Special Service Unit, SSU, which had been accused of at least 500 cases of enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings. When he disbanded this unit, reports show that another unit was formed to replace SSU. And this is called Operation Action Team within the DCI that has been accused of conducting...
What is the mandate?
Sorry?
What is the mandate of Operation Action Team?
So this is the unit that is being accused of carrying out abductions and enforced disappearance and extrajudicial killings of government critics. And even the report says some of the members of SSU were retained to operate under Operation Action.
It actually exists?
It does exist. It does exist. I will still refer you back to the Human Rights Watch report, which details the operations. So the president, on one hand, makes promises that he's going to end extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances, and on the other hand, a unit is formed to conduct the same crimes that he promised to end. Nothing has been learned.
Fred, then should any Kenyan take political class seriously? Remember those press conferences, those interviews, dismissing cabinet, promises that things were going to be different. So far, no justice, no lessons.
I think President William Ruto, in his reaction to all this political awakening by the Gen Z, there are certain things he did that showed goodwill at that time. You remember the president came out and for the first time had an engagement with the young people on X space, something that we have never seen before. And he talked. I remember attending one of those X spaces online, and I listened to him, and he was really regretting what has happened, and he was promising. The president came and did an overhaul in cabinet, you know. The president ensured that the IG at that time, Kome, resigned. The president promised a lot of things.
What do you mean ensured?
I'm sure the president, as someone who sits in the National Security Council, they must have discussed and agreed that in this instance, maybe we need to make changes. So and it was in the interest...
You're saying it was... didn't resign out of conscience?
No, he did. But the fact that, the mere fact that the president sits in that council, he must have seen it from his IG that this is the best thing you can do for your country by resigning. That's what I'm saying. And what I'm struggling with is, even when you talk about Operation Action Team, who forms these teams? Is the president aware that they are there, or is not aware? Because I've not seen that report, but who forms them? When a police officer shoots a civilian unarmed, from whose instruction? Where does he get his instruction? When people talk about orders from above, who is the above that give orders? That is why I am a bit worried, because if all these things end up at somebody's doorstep, then action must be taken. We might be blaming specific individuals, junior officers, I don't know who, but they also know that they are being given orders from somewhere. And that's why these investigations, I'm happy that there's an active case now, should reveal who gave them the orders. The person who gave them the orders must also have got an order from somewhere. Until we get to the end of the chain, then we shall get a solution to this. And lastly, Sam, you have asked me, do we still need to believe the political class? A government is a formation of a political process. Governments are formed through politics. And therefore, I would want to urge the public to put the political class to account. Even if we don't believe them, but let's put pressure on them so that we put people in office that we can believe. We have an opportunity.
But you see, Fred, every other election, people have put into office people they believe. Same thing happened in 2022. It is them that walk away from what they preach to the people.
Some, I agree with you. But again, also, every other election, we have an opportunity. When you make a mistake, you learn from it. If people made a mistake, then they must have learned from it. So they have an opportunity to do the right thing. But even as we're in this government today, as we have the current government, what can we do together to correct the past messes? What can we do together to ensure that we don't repeat it? I am happy we have a very active civil society in Kenya today. We have I'm happy we have a very active LSK. We are happy we have active Kenya Human Rights Commission. How do we collaborate as stakeholders to ensure that we dialogue? We must create opportunities for dialogue platforms, because this confrontation, we did this, he did this, it must go, they're not going to help us.
You know, Fred, the difficult thing is that you're calling for a platform for dialogue. Your party leader, let me call him so,
yes,
has that opportunity.
Correct.
Beyond dialogue, they have an MOU. And you are saying that things are not being followed as per the agreement. So what are these other occasions?
Raila Odinga is just an individual, a Kenyan who has the interests of this country at heart. Raila Odinga, as much as we call him an institution, he can only go to a certain limit. And I want to encourage every Kenyan, follow suits. If you feel that Raila Odinga has failed you, come out and follow the footsteps of Raila Odinga. People say that Raila Odinga failed them and abandoned them. And you see, when Raila Odinga presented himself for election, they never voted for Raila Odinga. When Raila Odinga come back now and say, okay, we lost this election, now Ruto is the president, how do we work with him for the benefit of majority? Again, people say that is betrayal.
Okay. You know, those Kenyans you're telling to follow the footsteps of Raila Odinga, they have done so. The past 1 week, 2 of them have been shot.
Unfortunately.
One is nursing serious injuries to the head. But anyway, Commissioner, what shall we do? Because the Human Rights Watch report that is referring to shows that human rights in the country have really deteriorated the past 1 year from all the state action, but also even in private when you find gender-based violence, especially targeting women. What shall we do?
Yes, picking on what, sorry, I forgot the name.
Fred.
I forgot Fred had said. The issue of MOUs actually should not be an issue, though it has come into play.
Yeah.
Because we already have a constitution which is very, very vibrant and has been thought through, and public participation has gone into it to bring, to accommodate our needs as a country and how we want to be governed. We also have different laws governing different sectors in our country, be it education, be it health, be it labor, economy, and all that. We also have political party manifestos. So all these things have already been well articulated and put down. So leaders, as they come into power, should be able to actually be committed to what they have given the promise to the citizen. Article 43 of the Constitution is very clear. It has listed all the critical areas of human rights that has to be provided. So young people are not asking for, they are not even looking for any MOU. They already know their rights, and it's there in the Constitution, it's there in the different laws, and in the political party manifestos.
Right.
So since we already have the full text and details of what we want, where we want our country to head as a rule of law, I think compliance with all the legal instruments, including even international instruments, because it's not only the Constitution, maybe the other provisions which we might have missed, and we can borrow best practices from other countries, because our country is signatory to so many other international instruments, plus East African Community regional laws. So if we want to make a way forward and make changes and improvement, I think we can, there are so many lessons learned and for best practices that we can borrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise our agencies are not working in isolation. I think looking at the micro and macroeconomic situation, looking at the environmental challenges and other global issues and national issues, this is something that is affecting families, and violation is happening at family units. They come from these homes, and there is generally a lot of stress in homes, be it because of food security, no money in the pocket, and there's a lot of challenge. I know we say we have a lot of debt to prioritize, yet we have so many other projects which are not priority, which should have given space to provision of basic rights, where youths and the families have access to basic rights. So unless you get your basic needs covered, so most of our youths actually, unfortunately, they are jobless, and idle mind is not going to be in a good place. Issues of mental health also comes in because of frustration. They have already used most of their parents' income for education. Right. And they still go back to idle around homes. So, and those who are working are also working poor, because as you have seen, the taxation has taken most of the money from people's pocket. So there are very big challenges. But above all, I think the most important is to have to comply with the Constitution and the laws, and the enforcement mechanism have to be strengthened. And I don't think we need to blame the police alone, because as we've heard, their powers, I mean, they work under command, and they also live under very difficult situation. I'm not campaigning for them, but these are also our young people. Yeah. And they work under command, and as they work under command, their own conditions actually, they are very, we have seen they live under very harsh conditions, and that should also be looked up into. All right. And also issues of prisons. So many young people are in prison for very flimsy things. From human rights perspective, we have observed through prison visits, we have seen so many mental health cases are landing in prisons under the guise of loitering. Yeah. And of course, they're idle, they're jobless. So, and prison conditions are not also corrective. These are the same youth that will be back on the street and might not be in best of behaviors.
Right.
So we need to actually look comprehensively into these things. Yes, Gen Zs have a voice, they have the energy, and they are not only the future, they are the present. Because in the digital world, they have a big opportunity and the space.
Right.
They only need to be facilitated.
Okay.
So, but we need to look at the holistic environment, because even as we talk of cases which are not being concluded, I have realized that it's a whole chain of failures. Because a policeman arrest, basic tests that should have been done to determine a case in some lab does not show up, or a postmortem is not well presented.
Yeah.
And then the prosecution, the court, it's a whole chain. So unfortunately, because they're the first in the front line, the police get
the first contact.
The beating.
Yeah.
They are the first in the front line, but we forget the whole chain of where governance has failed, of where duty bearers in different levels have failed. So as a country, I think it's a moment where we need to reflect and reevaluate ourselves, especially governance. And unfortunately, we give a lot of leeway and leverage to politics. We've killed political parties. I'm sure the next team will come in a different. I think there's a bit of misbehavior. We have allowed a lot of leverage for politics to just be done anyhow. Yet it's a very critical space where our leaders, our young people will learn how to be good leaders. But if we have a lot of shifting goalposts in our political space, yes, we have freedoms and rights, but rights and responsibilities have to give way to other people's rights. Because my rights and responsibility will stop where somebody else's rights start.
All right. Commissioner, thank you so much. You're getting into a very interesting conversation that we will continue to have. I want to thank you, because our time is up, to thank you so much for making time for us. Commissioner Sarah Bonai is from the KNCHR. Fred Okango is a Strategic Communications Advisor. Ernst Colonel Odor is a Communications Lead at KHRC. And Vincent Chahal is the Country Director at International Justice Mission, IJM. Thank you all for making time for us. Up next is Sporty Monday, but stay tuned. The whole of this week we'll be looking into what you've learned a year later since the protest and the killings, even as we remember them that paid the ultimate price. My name is Sam Gichuku. See you again some other time. Bye for now.